Story 1. My upbringing involved frequent cross-country journeys with my family. My parents possessed a deep affection for traveling on the open road, a passion that deeply resonated with both me and my fraternal twin brother, Raymond. This inherent love for long-distance travel ultimately guided both of us into the profession of truck driving. Raymond typically operated a Freightliner Cascadia model, while I piloted a newer Volvo VNL 860, which had been issued by our company only a year prior, replacing my earlier 780 model. We were both employed by the same trucking enterprise, Lone Star Freightways, which was headquartered in Houston, Texas. There is one specific journey in particular that continues to profoundly perturb me to this very day. My assignment involved a substantial long-haul delivery from Houston to Los Angeles, and subsequently a trans-border route from Los Angeles up to Vancouver, British Columbia. There was an interval of approximately 1 week between the cargo drop-off in Los Angeles and the subsequent pickup in Vancouver, affording me some much-needed downtime in the Los Angeles area. My cousin resides there, so I decided it would be a good opportunity to take a brief respite and extended an invitation to Raymond to join me on the trip. He readily agreed to accompany me, and our supervisor had no objections. The initial leg of our journey to Los Angeles proceeded without any hitches. We traversed open highways, enjoyed picturesque scenery, and made ample stops at various rest areas to punctuate the extensive drive. The only significant inconvenience we encountered was the congested traffic once we actually reached the sprawling city of Los Angeles, but we successfully navigated through it. We eventually parked our large truck at my cousin's residence, which boasted a generously sized property. We then spent the subsequent several days engaging in leisurely activities, visiting beaches, exploring local landmarks, and even making a quick trip to a retail store to purchase provisions for the upcoming segment of our journey. We departed from Los Angeles later in the evening, deliberately choosing that time to circumvent heavy traffic. The sun had already set, and after several hours of continuous driving, we began to feel hungry and decided to stop at a McDonald's located at a highway rest area. Raymond was at the steering wheel while I was enjoying a cheeseburger. It was at this point that circumstances took a decidedly ominous turn. A highway sign indicated that the thoroughfare ahead was completely closed. There had been no prior notification, no designated detour instructions, merely a compulsory exit onto an isolated, undeveloped backcountry road situated in the middle of an expansive, deserted area. We initially assumed we would rejoin the main highway further along. However, this particular road continued seemingly endlessly. Flat, desolate fields gradually gave way to a dense, foreboding forest. And by the time the clock struck midnight, we had not encountered a single other vehicle for many miles. Eventually, Raymond vocalized his need to urinate, so we pulled our vehicle over to the side of this intensely dark road, completely enveloped by trees. There were no artificial lights, no discernible wind, Not even the customary chirping sounds of crickets. Only an oppressive, absolute silence and a ghastly odor pervading the air, reminiscent of decaying flesh. While Raymond ventured into the darkened woods, I proceeded to the rear of the truck to inspect the cargo. The foul stench intensified noticeably, and my innate curiosity compelled me forward. I began walking back towards the cab to retrieve a flashlight, but just before my hand reached the door, I distinctly heard something. A faint whisper. "Hey, Nick," it uttered. I pivoted and observed Raymond approaching me. He appeared visibly disturbed. "Did you see that?" he queried. "See what?" I responded. He extended his arm and pointed across the road, into the depths of the trees. There was a light in the woods. Before I could formulate a reply, he suddenly froze, his gaze fixed on something directly behind me. I rotated and perceived it as well. Through the front windshield, barely discernible in the dim moonlight, were what appeared to be human forms. Dozens of them, suspended from the trees. I quickly seized the flashlight and directed its powerful beam into the dense forest. The illuminated beam unequivocally confirmed what I desperately hoped was merely a product of our collective imagination. There had to be at least a dozen bodies hanging there. Some of them looked disturbingly fresh, indicating recent death. Others were in various stages of decomposition. One, in particular, even seemed to have been eviscerated. I am not exaggerating in the slightest when I state that it looked as though someone had meticulously removed their internal organs. The gruesome spectacle caused me to gag uncontrollably. But then I committed the error of deactivating the flashlight, and it was at that precise moment that I saw it. Deep within the woods, a subtle, ethereal glow, a flickering, moving light source, and it was undeniably drawing closer. Raymond did not hesitate for an instant. He firmly grasped my arm and forcefully propelled me into the interior of the truck. We slammed the door shut, swiftly ignited the engine, and then dramatically sped away from that horrifying location. As we accelerated rapidly, I peered into the side mirror. Figures, perhaps 5, possibly 10, were now discernible, standing directly on the road where our truck had been previously parked. One of these figures stood out distinctly. He, or perhaps it, was notably taller than the others and had some kind of object covering its head. It appeared to be either a macabre mask or potentially a grotesquely deformed skull. Couldn't be certain. I had no desire to know. We continued driving incessantly until several hours later, when we finally pulled into a truck stop gas station situated off the main highway. While I was engaged in pumping fuel into the tank, Raymond contacted the local police authorities and our superior to report the disturbing sights we had witnessed. We still had the crucial responsibility of completing our delivery to Vancouver, so we pressed on with our journey. There were no further detours, no additional stops, unless they were absolutely indispensable. Only for food and fuel, and nothing more. Weeks later, we received information suggesting that we might have inadvertently trespassed into what was rumored to be the territory of some clandestine cult. Whispers and stories circulated about them. These rumors spoke of gruesome sacrifices, illicit organ harvesting, and ritualistic killings. They were purportedly highly active in some of the more remote and isolated regions situated between the states of California and Oregon. None of these chilling accounts ever surfaced in mainstream news reports. After that harrowing trip, I found myself unable to dislodge the vivid and disturbing images of those bodies from my mind. A few weeks following the incident, I ultimately resigned from my long-haul trucking position and accepted a considerably smaller local driving job closer to my hometown. Raymond, my brother, continued with his trucking career, but something profound within him had irrevocably altered. To this very day, he steadfastly refuses to discuss the events of that terrifying night. Story 2. This particular event transpired approximately 15 years ago, when I was merely 13 years of age. Even now, in the present moment, a persistent knot of anxiety forms in my stomach whenever I recall the details of that night. I was raised on a sprawling cattle ranch situated in a truly remote and isolated area, somewhere within the vast expanse of the Great Plains. Our family home was located 5 miles down a long, unpaved gravel road, entirely surrounded by expansive open pasture land. The nearest neighboring property was a considerable 2 miles away, meaning we were accustomed to a life of profound isolation. My father routinely handled all cattle deliveries. Truck drivers would frequently arrive with shipments of livestock, and we would proceed to unload them directly at the designated chute. It was a perfectly routine operation. However, that specific weekend was different. My parents had taken my younger sister on a trip to Dallas, and I was left alone to receive a late-night delivery originating from Nebraska for the very first time. I wasn't overly concerned, as I had participated in these deliveries numerous times before, though never without adult supervision. My father had imparted one crucial piece of advice before he left. Don't tell the driver you're by yourself. Midnight arrived and then passed, yet there was no indication of the truck's arrival. Around 1 a.m., I finally discerned faint headlights shimmering far off in the distance. But rather than pulling directly up to the ranch, the truck inexplicably stopped in the middle of the road and remained stationary for at least 30 minutes. There was no discernible movement. No one emerged from the vehicle, just its headlights piercing the profound darkness. Eventually, it began to slowly creep down the road and finally pulled up to the cattle loading chute. I ventured outside to meet the driver. Immediately, an unsettling sensation washed over me. Something felt distinctly off. This individual appeared utterly disheveled. His clothing was heavily soiled with dirt and numerous stains, as though he had been continuously living in them for days. He began to mumble incoherently about being behind schedule. He offered a disjointed explanation that included a flat tire, then the presence of animals on the road, and then something vague about fuel issues. None of his explanations made much logical sense. He then abruptly inquired about my age. I provided him with a deliberately vague response, something along the lines of, "Old enough to help out." He simply stared at me intently for a prolonged second. Then, he launched into a bizarre and rambling narrative concerning his younger years, specifically recounting how he had once dated a girl only to later discover she was related to him. And disturbingly, he apparently continued to see her anyway. The entire conversation was profoundly unsettling. The manner in which he spoke, the very cadence of his voice, conveyed that something was deeply amiss with him. It felt less like casual small talk and more like a calculated attempt to elicit a specific reaction from me. I maintained my composure, saying little, and simply instructed him that we should commence unloading the cattle, adding that my mother was waiting inside the house. He grumbled something unintelligible under his breath, then ascended the trailer to release the first group of animals. I remained positioned at a safe distance, carefully counting each. I reiterated that I needed to remain outside to continue counting. He persisted in his demands, but I steadfastly continued to decline. It became unequivocally clear that he was attempting to lure me into that confined space, and I was absolutely unwilling to comply. After a few more exchanges, back and forth, he finally relented and opened the gate. He then replicated this same strange and manipulative tactic with the subsequent 2 compartments, feigning a need for help and expressing frustration when I refused to step inside. But each time I simply reiterated my refusal. By the time the final group of cattle had been unloaded, his entire demeanor had undergone a dramatic transformation. He transitioned from being excessively chatty and seemingly friendly to becoming noticeably angry and short-tempered. Then, as if to conduct one last test of my resolve, he instructed me to climb into the cab of his truck and grab the delivery slip from his glove compartment. I was absolutely not going to turn my back on this individual, nor was I going to enter yet another confined space with him. I firmly told him to retrieve it himself. He stood there for a brief moment, observing me, then finally ascended into the cab, retrieved the slip, and handed it to me. I signed the document and informed him that our transaction was complete. As soon as he departed, I sprinted back to the relative safety of the house. From the vantage point of a window, I observed his truck remaining stationary outside in the darkness for well over an hour before he finally drove away. I did not permit myself to fall asleep until I was certain he was completely gone. That delivery should have concluded in 20 minutes, at most. Instead, it evolved into one of the most profoundly disturbing experiences of my entire life. I remain uncertain what the consequences would have been had I stepped inside that trailer. I am profoundly grateful that I never had to discover the answer. Story 3. Approximately 5 years ago, my now husband and I embarked on an extensive road journey, traversing the country from the East Coast to the West Coast. It was not our inaugural cross-continental drive, as we had undertaken similar trips previously. On this particular occasion, our primary objective was simply to return and collect the remainder of our belongings, and, most importantly, to retrieve our 2 beloved dogs. By that point in the journey, we were primarily focused on completing the trip as quickly as possible, consequently limiting our stops to only essential brief breaks for using the restroom or grabbing food. I genuinely cannot recall the specific state we were in when this incident occurred. After countless cross-country voyages, all the numerous rest stops, tend to meld into an indistinct blur in my memory. It was likely sometime between 3 and 4 in the morning when we guided our vehicle into a rest area. The parking lot was almost entirely deserted, with the exception of one solitary passenger car and a pair of large semi-trucks parked within the designated trucker section. Our plan was to switch drivers, stretch our legs a bit, and allow our dogs to relieve themselves. My husband had been driving, so I informed him that I would proceed to the restroom first, while he remained with our car and enjoyed a cigarette. The designated dog relief area was situated quite close to where we had parked our vehicle, but the restrooms themselves were located further away, beyond a small, elevated hill. From the main parking lot, they were entirely out of sight. Even though I didn't experience an immediate sense of danger, it was profoundly dark outside and remarkably quiet. So my husband decided to accompany me for the majority of the walk, simply as a precautionary measure. After I had finished, I headed back to attend to the dogs while he took his turn using the facilities. Now, I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, an intimidating individual in terms of physical presence. I stand approximately 5 feet 2 inches tall and am not particularly heavy. However, I am accompanied by 2 substantial German Shepherd mixes who are exceptionally protective of me. Furthermore, I had the benefit of growing up learning various self-defense techniques and possess the knowledge and ability to defend myself if the situation were to necessitate it. Therefore, despite the darkness and our relative isolation from the main illumination of the rest stop, I felt no initial apprehension or nervousness. As my dogs were diligently sniffing around and attending to their business, I became aware that one of the semi-trucks, which had been parked at the far end of the lot, had started its engine and was beginning to move slowly. At first, I didn't assign any particular significance to this. I simply presumed the driver was preparing to re-enter the highway. I finished cleaning up after the dogs and began walking towards the trash receptacle when I was abruptly momentarily blinded by intensely bright high beams. The semi-truck had advanced as close as it possibly could to the dividing line, separating the truck parking area from the passenger car area. And now, its powerful bright lights were aimed directly at me. Initially, my reaction was merely one of annoyance. I tossed the waste bags into the bin, squinted into the dazzling lights for a brief second, then turned back in the direction of our car. But as I continued walking, the truck started repeatedly flashing its lights, over and over again, as if the driver was deliberately trying to capture my attention. He then slowly inched his massive truck forward, still continuously flashing the high beams, and my initial irritation began to transmute into something else entirely, a growing sense of unease. By this time, my dogs had instinctively detected the alteration in my mood. They ceased their sniffing, became completely still, and fixated their attention on the truck, their ears erect and their gazes intently fixed. As I drew near our car, the truck driver stopped once more, still persistently flashing his lights. I wasn't experiencing fear yet, merely a mixture of confusion and profound irritation. I stood there, simply glaring back at him, patiently waiting for him to desist from his provocative actions. Eventually, the flashing ceased. I began to retrieve my keys from my pocket, preparing to enter the car. It was at that precise moment that both of my dogs froze completely. Their hackles rose along their spines, and they began to emit low, guttural growls. And then I distinctly heard a door creak open. I spun around and observed that the semi's driver's side door was now ajar, and a boot was starting to emerge. This individual was unequivocally about to exit his truck. I remained standing there, utterly motionless, contemplating the sheer foolishness of this man attempting to approach someone accompanied by two large, clearly agitated dogs, when, quite suddenly, my husband reappeared, walking back from the restrooms. He walked directly up to me, draped his arms securely around me, and without a moment's hesitation, he defiantly gave the driver the middle finger. The trucker paused, then slowly retracted his foot back into the cab, firmly shut the door, and within a matter of seconds, abruptly accelerated and departed from the rest area. Once we were safely back on the road, I recounted to my husband the entire bizarre sequence involving the flashing lights. It was then that he elucidated something to me that I had never previously encountered. Apparently, it is a known practice among some truckers to flash their lights at women at rest stops as a clandestine signal for, well, sexual encounters or hookups. I was utterly disgusted by this revelation. I was certainly not dressed provocatively or suggestively. In fact, I was wearing multiple layers of clothing because of the cold weather. I was driving a newer model car, walking two sizable dogs, and it was patently obvious that I was not out there actively seeking to engage in conversation with strangers. I don't believe I ever truly experienced outright terror during the incident, but the entire encounter undeniably ventured into deeply creepy territory. The man clearly perceived me as being alone, and there was something intrinsically off about his method of approach. It wasn't simply flirtatious or peculiar, but rather conveyed an aggressive undertone, as if he fully expected me to respond to his advances. I possess other, arguably creepier, narratives from our various travels, but this particular one consistently remains vivid in my mind due to the disturbingly casual manner in which it unfolded. It felt as though it was simply a routine action that this individual performed all the time. Story 4. This disconcerting incident occurred a couple of summers ago, precisely when I had just celebrated my 18th birthday. I had recently graduated from high school and was approximately halfway through my inaugural year of college, experiencing independent living away from my family home for the very first time. Having been raised in a rather sheltered environment, navigating life on my own was still a fundamentally new and unfamiliar experience for me. It is also pertinent to note that I am a woman, a detail that will gain significance as this narrative unfolds. It was the middle of May, and I was making the long drive back to my hometown for my brother's upcoming wedding. My academic institution was situated several states away, meaning I had an extensive journey stretching out before me. I was approximately an hour's drive from my college town, maintaining a steady speed along the interstate somewhere within the state of Tennessee. I believe it was Interstate 40. Traffic was somewhat heavy, but nothing beyond the ordinary for that time of day. It was early afternoon, bright and brilliantly sunny, when I observed something peculiar in my rearview mirror. There was a semi-truck a short distance behind me, positioned in the rightmost lane. There was initially nothing unusual about its presence, until I noticed its headlights flashing repeatedly. At first, I surmised that the driver wished to merge into my lane or perhaps overtake my vehicle. Consequently, I subtly increased my speed and maneuvered into an adjacent lane to provide him ample space. However, he did not proceed to pass. In fact, he maintained his position directly behind me, deliberately preventing any other vehicles from interposing themselves between us. And then he flashed his lights once more. I briefly glanced up at his truck. He raised a hand in a wave. Then he sounded his horn. It was at this point that a distinct feeling of unease began to settle over me. Nevertheless, I attempted to rationalize his behavior. Perhaps he was endeavoring to alert me to a malfunction with my car. I had received a tire patch only the week prior, and I began to experience a surge of panic, fearing that the patch might have become dislodged and my tire was losing air. The next highway exit was rapidly approaching, and I made the decisive choice to pull off the interstate, purely as a precaution. There was a gas station conveniently located directly off the exit ramp, and I reasoned I could inspect my vehicle there. I did not anticipate the truck following me, but to my dismay, it did. He pulled into the very same parking lot and proceeded to park his enormous vehicle in the designated truck zone. That was the unequivocal moment when I realized that something was profoundly wrong. I exited my car and swiftly walked around it, performing a quick visual inspection. My tires appeared perfectly fine. There was no emission of smoke, no unusual noises. Nothing seemed to be amiss, yet he was already in the process of descending from the cab of his truck and making his way directly in my direction. Unwilling to take any unnecessary risks, I remained stationed by my car, holding my phone firmly in my hand. With 911 already dialed and poised for me to press the call button, I positioned myself, partially concealed, behind my open driver's side door, utilizing the gas hose as a makeshift barrier between us. I felt my stomach clench. Instantly, every fiber of my being was screaming internally. I managed a strained, tight smile and uttered a polite, "Thanks," desperately attempting not to betray the extent of my fright. He then offered to pay for my gasoline. I politely but firmly declined, as I absolutely did not want him to harbor any illusion that I owed him anything. Was I currently enrolled in college? And it was at that precise juncture that an intrinsic inner instinct seized control, unequivocally prompting me to lie about every single detail. So I did precisely that. I supplied him with a fabricated hometown, invented a fictitious school, and asserted that I was merely stopping for gas on a brief trip to visit nearby family members. He did not press for more details, but he also did not depart. I cannot discern whether it was simply fortunate circumstances or if the sight of the 911 call screen, still prominently displayed on my phone, prompted him to reconsider his intentions. But as soon as the gas pump clicked off, signaling a full tank, I thanked him again, quickly entered my car, and drove away as swiftly as I could manage without attracting undue attention. He did not pursue me back onto the highway. I never encountered his truck again after that day. To this day, I still possess no concrete understanding of what his true intentions were. Perhaps he was merely a deeply unsettling individual, attempting to flirt in the most inappropriate and disturbing manner possible. Or perhaps it could have escalated into something far more sinister, had I not implicitly trusted my gut feeling. I never reported the incident to the authorities, and that remains one of my most significant regrets. I simply desired to put the entire ordeal behind me and forget it. But ever since that day, my perception of truck drivers has irrevocably changed. Story 5. Just a few months prior to this account, I was in the process of returning to my college campus after spending the weekend visiting my parents. The drive typically spans approximately 2 hours, and on this occasion, I was completely alone in my father's aging pickup truck. It was just me, some chosen music playing, and a highway that was mostly devoid of other vehicles. I am a 21-year-old woman, standing barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, which means I am not exactly an intimidating figure. I was positioned in the far left lane of a 3-lane highway, simply enjoying the moment, swaying along to the radio, singing aloud, and rather foolishly dancing in my seat, thoroughly reveling in the journey. It was at that precise moment that I became aware of a semi-truck slowly advancing in the far right lane, maintaining a speed exactly parallel to mine. I immediately ceased my dancing, feeling a slight embarrassment that someone had witnessed me behaving so awkwardly. I attempted to accelerate a little, hoping to pull ahead of him and out of his line of sight. But to my profound surprise, he also increased his speed. I then glanced over to discern the driver's identity, a man behind the wheel who appeared middle-aged and was balding, wore a faded blue t-shirt. He was smiling and waving at me, seemingly friendly at first. I offered a small, somewhat awkward wave in return, presuming that would mark the conclusion of the interaction. However, it most certainly was not. He proceeded to merge into the center lane, now only 1 lane away from me, and continued to wave, displaying an overly cheerful smile that felt deeply unsettling. I attempted to accelerate once more, and he matched my speed. I then deliberately slowed down, and he did the same. Regardless of what maneuver I executed, he steadfastly refused to let me escape his proximity. If another vehicle approached within his lane, he would wait until the very last possible second, abruptly swerve around them, and then strategically position his truck to block me from merging away from him. It was clear he possessed considerable experience with this type of aggressive driving. I did not. He was effectively utilizing the other cars on the road to trap me. For an uninterrupted stretch of 5 miles, I was utterly unable to shake him. And throughout this entire duration, he maintained his unsettling smile and continued to wave. At one point, he even began to hold up a single finger, as if making a number 1 gesture, a sleigh. I have absolutely no comprehension of what that particular gesture was intended to signify. But the unsettling expression in his eyes as he performed it sent a shiver down my spine. At that juncture, I was undeniably and officially terrified. I immediately called 911. I provided the dispatcher with a comprehensive description of the truck, a white trailer, a black cab, and a Pennsylvania license plate, detailing everything that was occurring. She advised me to pull over onto the shoulder of the highway, but the left shoulder was extremely narrow, and I did not feel it was a safe location to stop. Fortunately, the truck driver briefly became impeded behind another vehicle in the middle lane, and I seized that crucial opportunity to rapidly decrease my speed, switch over 2 lanes, and accelerate forward into the far right lane. He attempted to catch up, but this time, I managed to maintain my lead. The dispatcher then instructed me to exit at the next service plaza, which was situated a few miles ahead. She assured me that he would most likely not follow me once I left the main highway. She was mistaken. Without activating any turn signal or brake lights, he somehow intuitively knew I was taking that specific exit. As I began to pull off the highway, he braked sharply and seamlessly merged behind me, timing his maneuver with absolute precision, and continued to follow me into the service plaza. My heart was pounding frantically in my chest. I informed the dispatcher about the ongoing pursuit, and she promptly transferred my call to another operator, who calmly reassured me that law enforcement officers were already en route. Now, this particular service plaza was designed with a specific layout. Semi-trucks were mandated to take a separate road that looped around behind the main building, while smaller vehicles like mine parked out front. I pulled into an available spot near the main entrance and kept my gaze firmly fixed on the truck as he took the designated lane for large vehicles. He stared intently at me throughout his entire loop around the building. I did not want to remain there, exposed like a vulnerable target, so I drove over to a gas station, conveniently located adjacent to the plaza, which offered a clear view of the truck lot. I reasoned he wouldn't think to search for me there, providing a safer place to wait for the police. I was still conversing with the dispatch operator, attempting desperately to maintain my composure, and that's when I spotted him. He had exited his truck and was now walking towards the service plaza. However, instead of entering the building, he abruptly stopped and ducked behind a substantial concrete pillar, where he simply stood, surreptitiously observing my truck. I immediately informed the dispatcher that he was deliberately concealing himself. I conveyed to her that I was genuinely frightened and that I did not feel secure remaining stationary. She reiterated her instruction, "Hold tight, officers are almost there." Then he emerged from behind the pillar and began walking directly towards my truck. I shifted the gear into drive, just in case immediate escape became necessary. I kept my eyes glued to my mirrors. He executed a slow, deliberate circle around my vehicle, maintaining his unsettling smile throughout. It was no longer a friendly or cheerful expression. It was dark, calculated, as if he were meticulously searching for an entry point. That was the breaking point for me. I snapped. I pressed the gas pedal to the floor and sped out of the parking lot, informing the dispatcher that I would no longer be waiting. She apologized for the situation and assured me that officers would still investigate the area and engage with the man if they located him, but stressed that my immediate focus should be on safely reaching my home. I never discovered whether the authorities successfully apprehended him. I never saw him again after that terrifying encounter. But the most distressing aspect of the entire ordeal was the pervasive feeling that none of it would have transpired had I not been completely alone. If I had been accompanied by a male passenger, I am convinced he would have simply continued driving without incident. Story 6. I spent my formative years in a quaint, modest town where familiarity was commonplace. Everyone knew practically everyone else, even individuals living in areas somewhat distant from my own residence. Given this inherent sense of community, I reasoned, why not? I had grown up within these very confines. I possessed intimate knowledge of the local area. It felt inherently safe. I was engaged in a video call with my boyfriend at the time and openly informed him of my intentions. He commendably remained on the line with me throughout. I had regrettably neglected to bring any form of personal protection. There was no taser, no pepper spray, not even the personal alarm that my father had consistently urged me to carry. And yes, I had indeed snuck out of the house. My paramount concern was to prevent my father from discovering that I was out attempting to acquire cannabis. It was an incredibly foolish decision, but that was genuinely the state of my mindset at that moment. So, I was walking along. The darkness was absolute, pitch black. The streets connecting my neighborhood to the designated pickup location were barely illuminated. I needed to traverse railroad tracks, and the only sources of light available were a distant warehouse and a few isolated streetlights situated near the main road. As I drew closer to the principal thoroughfare, I observed a semi-truck parked on the side. This sight was not inherently strange. I had routinely seen large trucks parked in that exact spot since my childhood. But then I distinctly heard a voice call out, "Hola, hey!" I glanced over and saw a man leaning out of the semi's window. He appeared to be of Hispanic descent, wearing a long-sleeved red shirt. He looked much like any other man one might encounter in our town. But his smile, I cannot fully articulate it. It simply didn't feel authentic or right. There was an unsettling quality to it, an inexplicable something lurking behind his seemingly innocuous expression. I offered a small wave in return, simply as a gesture of politeness. He then began speaking to me rapidly in Spanish. I do not speak Spanish. Yes, I am aware of the irony. I grew up in a predominantly Hispanic town, but my parents regrettably never taught me the language. So I simply called back a hesitant, "No, hablo español," and continued walking. My boyfriend inquired about the identity of the person who had called out, and I dismissively told him it was just some random semi-truck driver, assuring him there was nothing to be concerned about. I continued on my way. I spent approximately 40 minutes searching, diligently attempting to locate the cannabis stash. I never did find it. My phone's battery was critically low, and my boyfriend informed me that it was time to return home. I concurred and began my journey back. It was then that an inexplicable, deeply unsettling feeling overcame me, a truly bad premonition. I looked down the dark, dimly lit street that led back towards the railroad tracks, and an inner voice, an instinct, unequivocally warned me, "Don't go that way. Just don't." Consequently, I turned and headed towards the opposite end of the street, in the direction of the warehouse. It was noticeably brighter in that area, and the increased light provided a marginal sense of security. I walked past several empty trailers, standing silently in the shadows near the building. And then I heard it. Hey. I spun around, and there he was. The very same truck driver, displaying that identical, unsettling smile. He emerged from behind one of the trailers, as if he had been patiently lying in wait. One of his hands was deeply jammed into his pocket, and he was angling his body in a way that suggested he was concealing something. He then motioned with his free hand, gesturing, "Come here." I remained frozen, completely unmoving. I urgently instructed my boyfriend, "Wake up your dad, come get me now." I began slowly backing away. My heart was pounding violently in my chest. I desperately tried to think clearly, tried to maintain my composure. The instant he comprehended that I was on the phone, his smile vanished entirely. He looked visibly angered. Then he started to duck behind the trailers once more, evidently not wanting to be seen. I turned and ran. I repeated my plea to my boyfriend, "Come get me. Please tell your dad, hurry." Despite the dire circumstances, I still harbored an intense reluctance to call my own father. I was still paralyzed by the fear of being discovered sneaking out, even with this man potentially attempting to abduct me. That is how distorted and terrifying the moment truly was. I bolted across the main road to a small mini-mart and quickly concealed myself behind an ice machine situated out front. I informed my boyfriend that I needed to end our call and instead dialed a friend. By some incredible stroke of luck, he happened to be out with his girlfriend and immediately told me he would be there without delay. While I waited for his arrival, I remained hidden behind the ice machine, cautiously peering out just enough to observe his semi-truck slowly driving past. I watched him meticulously scanning the parking lot, clearly searching for me. He paused for a brief second, shook his head as if in disappointment, and then finally drove off. However, even with his departure, I did not truly feel safe until I saw my friend's car pull up. The very moment I entered his vehicle, I completely broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. His girlfriend kindly held my hand and helped to calm me down. They safely transported me home. My boyfriend subsequently delivered a minor lecture, but honestly, I would gladly endure that any day over what could have transpired. That terrifying night utterly shattered any naive illusion I had harbored about being safe due to my physical appearance. I had always mistakenly assumed that no one would ever target me because I wasn't particularly thin or conventionally pretty. I believed I was effectively invisible. But predators, I learned, do not care about such things. They do not concern themselves with your level of confidence or what you personally believe provides you with security. They simply perceive an opportunity, and they relentlessly seize it. I was exceptionally fortunate that night, far too fortunate.